Ingo said, we don't know who they are. We don't know their agenda. We only know what has been sort of dictated to us by them. But I also want to say at the end of my journey, just came to the conclusion that, you know what, Ingo said, we have these extraordinary things inside of us. And if we could just unleash those, if we just believed enough to unleash those, we could do extraordinary things.
Hello, lovelies. Today I am so excited to bring a woman that I have been wanting to talk to for some time, and I'm so glad I finally get to do it today. Her name is Elly Flippen, and she is the author of a brand new book called Conjunction.World, A Journey Through the Mirror. But the reason that this whole discussion started was because Elly is the administrator of the Ingo Swann estate. And I think you guys know how crazy I am about Ingo Swann. But more importantly, she's also the niece of Ingo Swann and got to be his roommate and probably has amazing stories. So we're going to find out all about those today. So welcome, Elly. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to share these stories with Ingo, with you, and with your audience. I am very grateful because he's such an extraordinary individual, but also sort of a misunderstood individual, too, and often pigeonholed into certain areas where people like to slot him into certain things. So I like to sort of throw that cart on its side and talk about all these aspects of him, because he's like a magnificent little jewel that still needs to be like uncovered and polished and understood from this multifaceted viewpoint. So thank you.
Well, I'm so blessed. When I was younger, I got to meet Uri Geller.
Okay.
And it was a really weird kind of meeting in Beverly Hills. And I did not even know that Ingo existed at that time. And I actually spent some time living in New York City. And one of the biggest regrets of my life is that I got to meet Uri instead of Ingo, because I really do get the impression that he had the most extraordinary heart, the most brilliant mind, a fabulous sense of humor. And he is a walking demonstration of the powers that he believes that are innate to us and our species. And so he's such a package of gifts all wrapped up into one person. But I'm interested when you say he was misunderstood. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me how he is misunderstood and what he was to you.
Sure. So oftentimes people will use the sort of moniker of psychic, right? Because that's mostly what we understand. We've all kind of learned that word. And he would call it sort of a paraspeak word, so that parapsychology word, right? Sort of, we understand this because this is how a person with abilities has been framed to us as a psychic. And he really, really hated that term because it calls to mind, right? Somebody in a little corner spot with neon lights saying, come and get your tarot cards read, or get your fortune read, or get your palm read. And that's sort of the image that people are left with when you say it's psychic. And he never wanted that to be seen as, well, that is kind of hokey, right? Or the woo-woo, or however it is. And instead, he tried to approach it from a scientific standpoint, right? So he tried to say, hey, we have these things inside us. And he actually called it our perceptual awareness system. So we can actually be aware. So we've lost the idea of what aware actually means. It used to mean like wary or for opportunities. And of course, if you are controlling the population, the last thing you want is aware individuals, right? You don't want wary individuals who are kind of questioning what you're doing. So even the definitions of words have changed. So we're not that. And he would also say, we have more than just the five senses we are taught. And there, could be 20, there could be 30, there could be 40. And would often say, so people who are able to like hold things and sense things from holding it, they might have a perception that's allowing them in their hands to connect with that object. It's not necessarily like a psychic reading. There might be an actual sense in the hands that can interpret energy or frequencies coming off from something stored. So when people look at him and they say, oh, he's just a psychic, he is not just a psychic. He was an explorer of the sort of awareness perceptual systems. And like I said, trying to take that scientific viewpoint, right? Okay, we're in the age of we believe scientists more than anybody, right? If a scientist says it, then we will believe it. So, okay, so that's the way I'm going to go about it. And he was just really a lab rat, ultimately. I mean, hundreds of thousands of test trials that he did, and not just with the ASPR in New York or Stanford Research Institute, but a multitude of research laboratories, universities, organizations, just trying to build a kind of concept that could relate to the scientific world. So you look at somebody who is an empiricist, right, trying to bridge that gap. And then, of course, he's amongst all of that, he's an artist, right? He's got a passion for astrology. He's an author. So he is a very creative individual too. And then I had put out maybe over a year and a half ago, the book called Stardust Highways, Ingo Swann's Art of Entertaining, which was really my like love gift of Ingo, which is, this is how I knew him. That was your question. Like, how did I know him? I knew him mostly as an artist, but also as this incredible chef and entertainer, right? So I wanted to combine his artwork with his recipes because he grew up with his two grandmothers in Telluride, both ran boarding homes for miners. So he was always in the kitchen with them and he learned from them. And then he just explored. And all he had was like a hot plate with like two little burners on it and a toaster oven. And he rivaled the best restaurants in Manhattan. And he would throw these just outrageously creative dishes to a number, like dinner parties were just outrageous. And he'd have all sorts of guests, all different, and mingle them together and just these fabulous dishes. So I wanted to put together this art book that said, from when he started in the late 50s to his last painting, that is at the American Visionary Art Museum. And so started from the beginning of what you would serve at a dinner to the dessert at the end and have those recipes in there. And that is how I knew him best, was that way. Yeah.
Elly, I didn't even know you had this book. I have to get this book. I get the sense that he had with you there some of the most amazing parties and some of the most amazing guests. And that it was probably the place to be in New York, or in California with you when he was staying at Cupertino with you, that he had a lust for life, if you want to say that. And you were telling a story about how we'd make this cocktail with lots of different alcohols in it, and he loved to get people tipsy. To have been part of that must have just been, such an incredible gift.
Yeah, it was really funny. So he started in the 60s. He'd have, bottle parties, which are bring your own bottle parties. But he would serve this, what he called punch, and it's 3 alcohols. Yeah. So I found it because his very close friend, Pauline Winslow, was the author. She's a murder mystery writer. She's British. And in one of her books, I actually found this recipe, these 3, like he told me. So I was in my late, when I lived with him the first time, I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And, you just, at those times, you just had a camera, but you were very selective with what you took pictures of because you had to get the film developed, right? It was not so like you could just take it and delete it if you didn't like it. So you were very selective. And of course, there weren't really video cameras or that prevalent. And so he would tell me these stories and I would, being in my 20s, I just kind of was like, okay, Uncle Ingo. And I never really, like, I kind of remembered them. And now I'm like, oh, wow, wish I could be me now going back. Okay, say that to the microphone. Like, let's record this because they're so extraordinary.
I know. It's like things that I thought were kind of crazy back in my teens, like with, stories that my father would tell me. Now it's like, this is the most important thing that I've ever heard. And I have to try to remember all the details from it. So I totally hear you, darling. I totally hear you. But look, you've done such a great job remembering things and bringing these things to us. And that's why I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you, because I'm like, his books are so detailed and there's so much wealth of, like you mentioned about the words and how words have been diluted. That was an incredible education for me. One of my kind of fascinations currently is the whole idea of magic. And that is a perfect example of a word that has been distorted and made fun of. And part of magic is the word will. And so he goes into the word will and how, like in 1872, the definition was this long and now it's diluted down to I want. And so there really is this incredible kind of manipulation of our reality, of our words, of even our paradigm, right? This materialist paradigm that's kind of made this area that Ingo has been so interested in and so, what's the word? He spends so much time talking about that which I'm trying to kind of pull these threads, these little diamonds that he's left us and share them with my audience. And so to have you here and be able to ask you questions about what was he thinking or what did he really mean or what was the story behind this is just so exciting to me.
He's always said that from him, he was very tiny. He could see what he called butterfly lights around people. So he thought that was completely normal until he started to talk about them and then realized very quickly this was not something that everybody else sees. And he learned very quickly that he'd better not talk about these things because it seemed to upset his parents when he did talk about it. And so, like, for him, that was sort of part and parcel of his whole life, was being able to see energies that he described as lights. And when he started to paint these energies around. And, like we first comes to New York and he's just trying to make it in New York and he's just trying to fit in and he's sort of emulating Dali, which is, I think, kind of that surrealistic mindset, and wasn't really making inroads and said, forget that. I'm just going to paint what I want to paint and I'm going to paint the things that I see. And that's what he does in his art. So when he's just talking about being able to see energies around people, he could see it all the time. And not just the sexual stuff, right? He could say if somebody was walking down the street, he could tell if maybe they were near death or there was something going to be extraordinary happen to them just by their energy fields. Right? So I just kind of learned, like, the only thing he taught me, people always ask me, did he teach you remote viewing? And I said, no. That was like he never thought I was qualified for remote viewing. So that was the one thing we never talked about. And everybody, of course, wants to talk about remote viewing. But he taught me everything else, like these energies and forces and how you can actually create these things around you, just by putting some attention, right? He would be calling, like, we pay it. For example, when he first goes to SRI and Hal Puthoff wants to test him on his psychokinesis work, that's what he's very interested in. He takes him to the Hall of Physics at Stanford University. There's what is called a quark detector. It's buried under 8 feet of cement, and they just want to play around. So he wants to see, okay, well, do your thing. And his thing was, having done experiments where he influenced temperature gauges in sealed thermistors. And so Hal wants to see him do something similar, but this time there are a number of physicists in the room. It's a machine that's buried under 8 feet of cement. Its design is classified. No one knows what it looks like. And it has only been looking for quarks. So the whole time it's just, been a steady line, and he tells him to do his thing. And so Ingo says, well, he didn't know what to do, but he shifted his attention to this. And when he shifted his attention to it, he started to draw what this machine looked like. And when he drew it, then the machine went like this. And all of the scientists, these physicists who had only seen like this line, started freaking out, right? Because it had never fluctuated. And not only that, but he drew something that was classified, its design. But I offer that as an example because he's saying our attention is just like those energies or forces that are around us, our attention. So like, how many times I like to do this, like sit in a restaurant and stare at somebody and somebody will immediately turn around and look at you, right? Because you're putting your attention, you're creating some sort of energy between you and that person. So yeah, I would say he naturally knew how to do it, but he said we all have this ability. We just need to believe that we have it and learn to train ourselves to do that. And obviously, when you read Psychic Sexuality, the most, prevalent way to do this is through sexual. I mean, those are the most, if you think about it, when you're really attracted to somebody, that kind of chemistry that you're feeling is very, very, you're very pulled to somebody, or you're very repelled from somebody in some cases, right? Yeah.
I agree with you. I actually did a video called Attention is Our Most Occulted Superpower, because it's A, like you said, it's something that you can play with. B, if you think about the world we're in today, they call it literally the attention economy. So that'll give you an idea of how important it is that everybody out there is vying for attention. But when I think about, I'm trying to kind of put together in my mind the process by which Ingo might have taught you these things. And so it's clear that putting your attention on these powers is a way to do it. And there's a kind of an old saying that energy flows where attention goes. And so the way that I kind of frame it in my head is that you and I are both completely capable of playing guitar or learning, let's say, a language like French or something like that. But we haven't been taught the letters of French. We haven't been taught the words, how to put the letters together and how to make sentences. And so it seems to me that there are equivalents in these, let's just call them powers, for lack of a better word, but that there are letters, that there are words, that there are sentences, that all we need to do is kind of put our attention on them. And then we can start to see if, for example, you might be a gifted guitar player and I might be a gifted piano player, and I'll never get guitar, but, I can do the piano. And so that we all have, out of these 40 or 50 different perceptions and awarenesses that we might have. For example, I am really good at hearing people on the phone and knowing if they're in a good mood or a bad mood. Is kind of, I can just hear one word and it's like, are you okay? So, my ability to hear emotions, for example, is really good. Where my husband, no idea, right? There's just no idea, no awareness of people's kind of mental states when he's talking to them. So what would be the letters, the words, darling, that we put together to get these, once we put attention to them, once we know, let's know that they exist, how do we start working with them to actually develop them?
That's a really good question. I get that question a lot. I think it starts it's just for me having read some of his essays. So he, in the mid 1990s, created his website, BioMind, Superpowers of the Human BioMind. And part of it was to be a holding place for his memoir, Remote Viewing the Real Story. But also these kind of essays that he did on a number of topics. And they're very, very high level, right? They're very complicated. You have to really sit with a dictionary and an encyclopedia and work your way through it. which is why when I finished my book, Conjunction.World, and I was turning to his essays, I actually excerpted and edited ones on awareness and perception and created a second book called Why Do We Feel There's More to Us Than We or Anyone Knows? And sort of was like a rewriting of some of these essays. And my sort of takeaway from that is you have to start by believing, right? You have to start that's the very first step, is that you have to believe. And then you have to start paying attention to these things. And then from there, there's kind of a nuanced thing. So everybody sort of asked me, how would you do it? And I'm like, well, I don't really know, because I just did these things with him, right? And he didn't really necessarily give us great guides. He sort of gave us a master plan. So if you look at his books, he has psychic literacy, which is part of that kind of becoming aware part of it, what all these things are, or resurrecting the mysterious, which is, obviously sort of also a big high level kind of understanding of these things. Reality boxes, again, understanding that frames of reference have been built for us and that we have to learn that we're in some sort of reality prison to break out of it, kind of thing. The closest I kind of think that he came was your Nostradamus factor and natural ESP.
It's literally just a ride, darling. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a tough question for me, because I just know these things and I just trust myself, and I think that he did too. And I think what he was trying to say is just that first part of the equation is just get us into a different reality mindset and breaking those molds. But in terms of learning that, I think he would say start by firsthand experience, right? That if you he was often asked at SRI to see what was in an envelope in a different room, and he finally got to the point where he said, well, if you want to know what's in the envelope, just open it yourself, right? Because and I think he would probably say the same thing. If you want to know, just open it yourself. You kind of have to start with what he would call your strange mind experiencing, and doing that. But in terms of once you're on that road and getting there, the only two I think he came closest to were those two books, Natural ESP, which was more remote viewing oriented, and then your Nostradamus factors about the future. But if you can get yourself through these essays, he does talk a little bit, and he's mostly aiming it at listening to yourself. So your intuition and your gut responses, because he's saying, obviously we have these systems, and I'm sorry to kind of go back to them, but we're obviously built with something to help us survive in the world. So we can feel along what those energies and forces are. And if there's some sort of change or shift in them, being able to interpret that. And that might just be a personal thing to each person, what they understand. And it's a hard question. Yeah.
I think the reason that it is a hard question is, and I really think you've pinpointed two of the things. The first thing is belief. And we have grown up in a materialist society where things that you can't touch and you can't measure don't exist. And so when these things happen to us, the first thing we do is dismiss them as not being real. We're like, oh, that couldn't happen. That's a coincidence, because we're brought up and we're conditioned to believe that these things don't exist. So I think that is for the first step for people to pay attention and don't dismiss them right away, is probably cracking the door open a little bit. Like I think one of the biggest things that happened to me is that I was in a head-on car collision, and I heard a voice that said, "Do not move." And it was as loud as your voice is right now, at the same moment as my husband was screaming, "Get out of the car, it's going to explode." But for some reason, that voice was more that important. So I didn't move. And it turns out that I had a broken neck. And if I'd moved, I could have, moved the vertebra and sliced the thing. And so that was a real wake up call for me when this voice, it cracked open the door. And so I agree with you that we all have these experiences, right? We all know that it's going to be mum before the phone rings, or something bad has happened to my husband or my child. We have these knowings. And if we can just accept them, and look at them and pay attention to them and not dismiss them, I think that might be the way that we can at least open the door to the possibility of them. And something that you said earlier, I think, is very much, apropos. When I think about the secrets of power, Ingo, as I said, he goes into the books and he goes into, as he calls it, the labyrinth of power, that there are forces out there that don't want us to develop these awarenesses, as you have already said. And it feels like in that book, he's really trying to open our eyes to the fact that we are under control and that we really do have these powers. And so one of the questions that I had for you on my list is, did Ingo ever go into who he thinks these powers are? Like, does he think that they're the government, right? The CIA? Or did he feel that there was, he had his interactions with the aliens and he looked at the dark side of the moon? Like this labyrinth of power, what was his gut on where this control is coming from?
In my book, Conjunction.World, I do chapters on what I call historical tidbits, because he loves that word and he uses it. And I do talk about that. So in his book Penetration, he does say he believes there are two opposing forces, not human, that are working with human collaborators to keep us down.
This is why I want to do a whole interview with you on this book.
Yeah.
Tell us this 1973 story.
So in 1973, Ingo writes a letter to L. Ron Hubbard. So he was involved in Scientology at the time. So he was very close with L. Ron Hubbard and various individuals who are high up in Scientology. It's something he was very interested in. He was very interested in a number of things: Eastern religion, Western philosophy, any number of things that he explored: Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, all kinds of things he was interested in.
All the good stuff.
All the good stuff. He studied at the Arcane School, which is Alice Bailey's school. He studied at Rudolf Steiner's school. So
I was going to ask you if he liked Rudolf Steiner. I feel like there was a Rudolf Steiner influence there. So thank you for that, Elly.
I think so. I think he would say he probably, from what I have gathered from his writings, he seemed to resonate greatly or have great respect for Alice Bailey, probably more than Steiner, but I would say the influences are there. Yeah. So anyway, in Scientology, he's been at SRI for a year. So he came to SRI in 1972, and he's only part-time. He's not full-time, and he's a contractor, and he's just doing these experiments. But he writes to L. Ron Hubbard that he has come to understand that there is some force that is working with mind control to create a uneducated, unemployable population, and that we are not alone on this planet. And interestingly, this kind of goes with Project 8200. It's a book that's out now that after he writes this to L. Ron Hubbard, Pat Price shows up at SRI, and they begin kind of working on these UFO bases. And Ingo, in an Art Bell interview, said that Pat Price called them human extraterrestrial cooperation bases. So when you look at his book, Starfire, he's kind of talking about this kind of mind control. And he's talking about these devices that both the US and the Soviets have that are really geared toward mind control and population control. So that was something that very concerned him. And I do think that there was probably a lot of truth to what these devices were that he's talking about in Starfire. And it's quite possible that there are these cooperation bases that he was talking for that do have high, Joe Mnemonical remote viewed these. So after Price died and then Hal Puthoff kept his papers, with the Stargate remote viewers, various Stargate remote viewers were tasked with these same bases. And Joe Mnemonical was the first one and articulated that at this base in Alaska that there were high energy outputs, a tremendous amount of energy. So it's not unrealistic to think that some collaboration is happening where there is some sort of frequency output that's able to manipulate our mind in some way in terms of how we think about things, how we respond to things. I mean, we know that a great deal of the MK Ultra experiments that were done in the 50s and 60s were on mind control, on subliminal inputting into, through media and through movies. So it's not unrealistic to think that not only are we broadcasted, but these things are broadcasted, but we're also, inundated with these through our media. And then if you look at social media, if you're just scrolling, you're already kind of put into some sort of hypnotic state, right? You're just kind of scrolling and then this targeted message. So it's not unrealistic to think that there is a human component to it, but there's also something beyond. And I talk about in my book that he had this book called What Will Happen to You When the Soviets Take Over. He wrote it in 1980. I have put it up on the Ingo Swann website. I have all the mechanical art. So, in 1980, you didn't have a digital file. You printed it out and you cut it out and you pasted it on the big sheets, and that's what printers use. So I just made PDFs of that, and that's all it's a free PDF on the website. And inside that, he talks about the ruling, he talks about the ruling elite in the Soviet regime. And the way he explains it is there's a nuance to the name. It's a Soviet name. There's a nuance to it that I found, which was that even though they seem like the ruling elite, there's still something above them that's controlling them. And I think he was saying, yes, there's a human power system, but that human power system is they're puppets to something greater. And then that's why in Penetration, he said there is something else. He said in his Art Bell interview, those who rule this planet. Okay, not run this planet, but rule this planet. So, I do think that he felt that there was a control system that is multi-layered. And I think that's probably why he was saying, let's break through that, because we can actually develop these things. Despite all of that that's coming at us, all the manipulation that's happening in media or whatever is being broadcasted to us by some other means, we still can put that aside if we're present enough to say, no, you can't come in, you can't, and I'm going to cut back on my media. And it's really, fascinating because I was watching this movie. It was about the dating game killer. It's a new movie. Yes. Yeah. And the whole time I was sitting there and I was rooting for the serial killer. And I'm why am I feeling like I should be rooting for this serial killer? Why am I feeling it? And I go, oh my gosh, it's probably some sort of subliminal programming in there. And if that could be that insidious, that is pretty insidious. If that's that feeling, what else are they doing to control how we think about something or how we react to something? And I need to way cut back on my media, on my social media, and be very attuned to what is happening when I watch something. I was like, wow, like that was a big revelation for me.
There's so many things in there to unpack. The first thing is you're absolutely right. A thing that occurs to me all the time is that if Ingo was alive today and was aware of just the algorithm, how insane it's become. And yes, I agree with everything that you said, that there are waves, that there are algorithms, that there are messages. It's just absolutely incredible, the onslaught of what is happening to us. And it explains a lot of what we see in the world. So I agree with you that there's levels of mind control. I also had a friend who wrote the book, The Alien Interview. And in that book, he was recounting the story of a nurse who worked with the government, who was in charge of an alien that they'd captured. And basically the story that this alien told this nurse was that, yes, there's a power, a force for good and a force for evil. So that kind of lines up there as well. But I want to wind back a little bit because Ingo was talking about that forces have been unleashed upon the earth.
Well, interestingly, in my book, I talk about coming across a classified document. And it's an interesting document because it's written to kind of to show Gondola Wish, which was the first remote viewing army program, why it should be continued to be funded. And it's talking about sort of this history of parapsychology, the government funding of parapsychology. And it's really kind of this narrative. And it's going along and it's kind of saying like what was happening where and when and why something got funded. And it's just a very nice historical thing. And then all of a sudden it just says, out of nowhere, that a group of Nazis, right, a group of leadership of a society of Nazis unleashed, a dark thing on the world, and opened this Pandora's box, and now it can't be put back in. And so I did, in my historical tidbits in my book, I do talk about this. I don't know that Ingo necessarily believed this, but I know people around Ingo did think that the Nazis did open something. I do know that when he was at SRI, somebody who was affiliated with kind of a group of MK Ultra type individuals, they went out drinking one night. And they came back to his apartment, and this is Brendan O'Regan, who went on to be the research director at IONS, wanted Ingo to channel. And Ingo was like kind of drunk, and so he decided that would be an okay thing to do. And what he wanted to channel is he wanted Ingo to go to Tesla's inventive space, because they believed that the Nazis had done the same thing. He doesn't say this in there, but you can kind of make this connection that Tesla had gone somewhere, connected with something, and brought this information back. And so there's the sense that the Nazis did the same thing, whether it was like they had gathered enough information and had enough hubris to think they could control whatever it was. But ultimately, this thing is very powerful. You can't control it, and so they obviously connected with something. That's what this paper is saying. They connected with something. I mean, they went from technology-wise, bottom of the rung, to all of a sudden extraordinary things. People are seeing extraordinary things in the sky. So there's that sense that they connected in Tesla's inventive space, brought something back. But, nothing is free. There's always a price. And I think that's what this paper was saying. So it's like this, it's so fascinating in this declassified thing, like, oh, and this person at this research university and this person's a researcher. And by the way, Hitler's group unleashed this horrible thing on the world and it won't be back. And then ends by saying that my interpretation of it, I spell it out in the book, is basically you better have a lot of light protection to survive in the real reality we live in. So I'm like, okay, there is a real reality that we live in. And I think that's what Ingo was trying to say, is there's a real reality that we have no idea about. And I think that, again, where I go back, where he's just trying to break us out and say, we think reality is this, but reality is completely different.
So what is real reality? Tell me what real reality is, darling.
I think the real reality is that we're, very powerful people as a species, very powerful, but there is something that is keeping us from knowing that, and that there is something else here, and there could be something else, interstellarly too. I don't know that, but I think there's much more going on, and in my book, I talk about like catastrophic disclosure. And I say, I think catastrophic disclosure happened 60,000 years ago. There's a cave painting that was found in Indonesia, and it is, these half human, half animal figures, which anthropologists say, kind of represents the spiritual world. And it's a hunting scene. And, and Ingo says, in Penetration, but he also talks about it in a Fate magazine article where he says, people, we're a supermarket of sorts. Right. There's something, and I think this is a very Fordian idea. Charles Fort said the same thing. John Keel said the same thing. It's kind of repeated in other places that there are opposing forces, and there's probably something they need from us in some capacity. Right. And that was sort of, I think Ingo was trying to say that in Penetration. I know Keel was saying, I know Charles Fort said it, and I know a number of abductees experience that kind of thing, right? Things are taken from them biologically, but mostly that's something that relates to some sort of reproductive aspect to them. Yeah.
My husband loves to call us like we're a chicken farm.
Yeah.
And the other analogy I love is, when you put the little string on the baby elephant, and then the big elephant has no idea that it can break free of the little string. And so, there's so many analogies. And then you have, Twin Peaks. David Lynch talks about the luge idea, where they want to eat our emotion or our energy. And of course, the Matrix, right? The idea of the Matrix. There's so many of these. People are kind of feeling around what feels like, the blind man and the elephant. You just know by living here that it's inhuman what is going on this planet. Humans of their own volition. I can't believe that some of the evil that we get up to is a human thing. There seems to be other forces here that are influencing us. And so, yeah, it's like, what exactly is this elephant that we're all trying to put our hands on? But it's I think we're getting closer, darling. I think we're getting closer. I think we're getting closer to it. And I think that Ingo's work, enabling us to break through the confines of this reality that they've constructed around us, is going to enable us to move into the kind of species that Ingo envisioned for us. And I wonder, in your book, you're talking about the protection that we need. Is there something also about raising our consciousness to a level that protects us from these lower influences on us? Have you come across anything about, if we can raise our level of consciousness, we kind of escape the hold on us at all?
Well, I know just from my personal things, something that happened to me while I was writing the book is I went to my apartment's workout room, and normally it's a very small room, but I use the elliptical, and they face a window, so the back of them is the main part of the room. And normally I'm alone. And so if you're wearing some sort of earphones, you wouldn't know if somebody came in behind you. It's a little unnerving, right? Like, you don't know. And the weights are behind you. Like, somebody could pick up a weight. It's just, you don't know what's behind you. So normally I'm alone, but in this day there was a man in there. And immediately as I opened the door, I could feel bad vibes. And I kind of in that moment attributed it to, okay, because there's a guy in there working with weights and he will be behind me, right, when I work out. So I didn't really listen to myself, because it was so overwhelmingly negative, but that's the way I attributed it. Well, okay, there's just somebody else in this room. But I got onto the elliptical machine, and all of a sudden, like, I felt from my right side, not him, he was sort of like behind it, like I'm on the machine, he was like behind me here. But from my right side, I felt this tremendous energy. And all of a sudden, I was literally picked up in the air. And I was like in the middle of, like, I had my hand on the machine, I was putting my phone down and had the machine, and I was picked up in the air. And I was held in the air, and I can still feel it. And then I slammed down literally right underneath the guy who was working out. And he never stopped. He like never stopped lifting weights. And I was literally looking up at him as he's like doing the weights. And I'm like, how could you not know that I was like, are you, like, that's when my mind was like, was this attached? Like, and then, was like so in shock, and that my phone went one way, my earbud case was in my pocket, went another way. So I'm scrambling on the ground just to collect all my stuff. And like, I was like, said, I am not going to let this get to me, whatever this was. Like, I could feel this negativity. I'm not going to let this win. And I got up on a machine, and I actually talk about, and so I did, and mostly just to say, I'm not going to be afraid of you. I mean, obviously this is very powerful, because if you could pick me up, I mean, my God, what could do that? But I'm not going to be afraid. And so I stayed for 20 minutes and I left. And the next day I saw a hawk on like the railing outside of the workout room. And I felt like the hawk was saying, we got you, like that. We're here for you. We're present now. You don't need to be afraid. And I saw it again later, but ultimately the trauma from that experience, like not knowing again what could be behind me, ultimately, like I would spend less time going to the room, even though I was telling myself, I have this, I'm more powerful than this. I just didn't want that. And ultimately I was going less and less. And so I ultimately just joined a workout club because I couldn't deal with the trauma factor of knowing what was behind me. But the feeling was, we are more powerful than this, and we can stop it. Because, once I said, you're not in control of me. I mean, you may have done this and I was unaware, but you're not going to do it again. It didn't try again. But that was for me a very like eye-opening experience, because even I went on all these journeys and I went to all these places, there's still like, is it real? Is it really real? I mean, it just seems like fantastical. Like maybe it's just in my mind, like everything I experienced. Yeah, maybe it's not real. I'll tell you, when that happened to me, I'm like, yeah, it is real. This is real. This is real. That is it. When I was on the ground and I was sort of getting my stuff together, I'm like, no, this is like, it was very eye-opening for me that, okay, there is something. Yes, I went on a lot of things and I did determine there was something else here, but it did still seem kind of unreal until I was picked up and thrown on the ground. And then it became very real for me. But I didn't let it happen. I didn't let it affect me where I said, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. Like the hawk was saying, you can do something about this. You can say, I'm just going to present white light, or I got back up in the room. And when I was on that machine, I just tried to surround myself with a lot of white light, and nothing happened again. Nothing bad happened after that. And I think that was just because I was saying to myself, I'm not going to let you win. You don't have control over me. You might have in that moment, because I was unaware of what you really were, had control over me, but you don't now.
You were blindsided.
I did, yeah. Yeah.
What we talked about attention before. I equally believe that intention is just as powerful as attention. And this is where, again, I'm going to say magic. And again, the word magic has been diluted and made fun of, but there are practices within magic that are really powerful for this kind of thing. And so what you did magically was absolutely perfect. you established your sovereignty through intention. And that is how you do protect yourself from these things. The problem comes in, as you found, is that belief question, because belief is binary. You either do believe or you don't believe. And so where we get into trouble also, again, because of our programming, is believing that it's real. And so we can have this intention, but all of a sudden, if we start doubting ourselves, then we kind of get into trouble. And that comes from being born in this reality, this materialist like what's really interesting, Elly, is that it's only really been the last 300 years that this stuff wasn't real for us, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But Delia, I can't even imagine, like, the bravery to say, you're not, even though you've just thrown me across the room. Like, that's wild, darling. That's wild. Is that the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you? Like,
I think so.
What is the weirdest?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there were a lot of, I think, entities at 357, and I do talk about it in the book. And, you know, Ingo was on there constant. I didn't realize this until we found what it would be self-auditing notes. So what Ingo did is in the middle 1990s. So he's retired. And, you know, he's had these experiences with seeing structures on the moon. And so he comes up with a group, and they decide that they're going to investigate the moon, right? And they call it Project Moondrop. And it's very well articulated. It's very sort of like scientific oriented. We're going to investigate this, and we're going to try to figure out what happened to the NASA photographs. And we're going to try to remote view, but it's one of many things we're going to do. Right? We're going to gather telescope data. We're going to gather videotape data, because there are people who had very high-powered cameras looking at the moon. So, you know, a number of things. And somebody comes along and shuts them down. Basically says, you need to, if you value yourself, you're not going to keep looking at the moon. So at that point, I think they started then. The group kind of changed individuals, but a core group stayed together. And Ingo decides they start connecting up with a group of like higher intelligences, but they're all female. And so Ingo, you know, had studied at these places. Ingo actually served, as I said, he did these channeling sessions. He served as a medium. He was very aware of, you know, a lot of different entities. Decides that they're going to connect up with these higher intelligences, like to go to the moon. But I don't think it's really the moon. I think it's some interdimensional thing that they're going to. And they, in a later session, they say they're going to escort him. Like they're going to, you know, escort him to the moon, and there's telepaths there and other, whatever. But they don't show up, and Ingo keeps going because he thinks he can keep going. And he runs into a telepath who like immediately shuts him down and kicks him out, right? And after that, Ingo starts to experience a number of psychic attacks. And so we found these session notes in his archives at the University of West Georgia. He's using self-auditing to try to figure out what is going on. He's like got headaches, his body hurts. He's sick. He's trying to figure out, is it cancer? Is it some physical? Is it like mental? Or am I feeling something? Like you talked about like feeling other people. He's like, am I feeling what my mom is feeling? Am I picking up stuff from my sister? Am I picking up stuff from other people? What is this? And he finally determines that it's some interdimensional attacks going on with him. And because, you know, he just went in thinking, you know, all of his training, he thought, well, I'm just going to, they're so sweet and they're so nice. No, they're like, they were a lamb that they led to the slaughter, you know, you didn't get it. And now you're being inundated with these kind of attacks. So, for him, you know, when I read that and I said, you know, like he's trying to sort it out himself, but that wasn't the only time. I feel like that was kind of a constant thing for him. And I feel like even in remote viewing, he talks about, even in his art val, he says, even in remote viewing, initially, like he started as kind of that out of body type. That was the work he was doing early on, was sort of these out-of-body experiences, and he would leave his body in view. And whenever you leave your body and you go into a different plane, there are things in that other plane that you're going to come in contact with. And it's something that he experienced. And you can see in one sort of session from the 1970s, he says he's sort of broken because he's still over our remote viewing, because he's still connecting up with, he has to keep shutting down his comm lines because things keep coming in. And I think that was ultimately why he developed controlled remote viewing, where you do not leave your body. You are still in your body and you're putting your attention out, but you're not leaving your body. So you're keeping a very narrow communication line and you're gathering data in stages, right? It's not like full force, I'm leaving my body and I'll go and investigate this and then I can look at everything that's there. It's a very slow, methodical way of bringing data back. And I think the whole reason for that was because all the other methods left open the possibility of being influenced by things that you find out there somewhere. And so I do think that he, even in the 70s, was picking up things that he was constantly having to try to contend with, right? To deal with, to clear himself of, while trying to create something that crosses some sort of interdimensional, right? When you're going to pull data from somewhere else, you're not operating in this realm per se. You're having to cross some sort of line of something, like no different than, like, do you remember, like, I don't know, those party lines when you first had like telephone lines and sometimes you would pick up other people? It's the same kind of concept, right? You're sharing some sort of communication channel. So you're trying to have to put some sort of bumpers against trying to be influenced by those things. And that's why I think ultimately he developed controlled remote viewing, so that he would limit that. But I do think he often picked up things that he was having to deal with. Yeah. I don't know. Was that
you have this in your book as well, though, too, darling, I think.
A little bit. Where I know he was dealing with attacks, but and not necessarily why he developed CRV. I think because he was just constantly being bombarded with something that was out there. Which is why when I see now people try teaching remote viewing, and it goes hand in hand with contact, it is exactly what Ingo was trying to prevent. The very thing he was trying to prevent. It was to develop a technique that kept you kind of safe from that kind of interference. And then now it's sort of like kicking that to the curb and like opening yourself up. And I don't know that people are prepared for what they might encounter in those situations, right? Yeah.
So, do you think the body itself is the protective mechanism?
I don't know. I mean, Ingo just would always teach me to just, envision a lot of light. And which is kind of fascinating, because they did find this manuscript after he passed away, didn't send it to his archives. It's called Master of Harmlessness. And when I first read it, I thought it was an early draft or some sort of draft of Purple Fables. But it wasn't. It was its own story. And in it, sort of like it's like told from, he says it was dictated to him, just like Purple Fables was dictated to him. That this story came in sort of like ancient Asia. This master comes to the town and he's telling everybody, hey, you're glorious beings. That kind of concept, right? You're all glorious beings. You just have to see it in yourself. But the latter chapters are that there are demons. Like he says we all have like hate and anger and all that hostility that we carry. And then he's like, there's mega demons like war and atrocities. And then there are demons that we probably shouldn't even pay any attention to, right? They're not of us. They're outside things. So I think he's talking about entities. And that you should put these demons in a bubble and then pop them, right? You just pop them. Like in your mind, you put this and you just pop it and you release it, right? And I was like, that's so awesome of an idea, right? This chapter. And then the next chapter is like angels coming. And the people in the town say they recognize that these aren't angels, they're aspects of themselves. That he's saying they're aspects, like the demons are aspects of yourself. And then ultimately, rapture is this releasing these negative aspects of yourself and embracing the positive aspect is how you reach that rapture. So you don't need these outside things. You can do all of these things yourself, kind of thing. And yeah, so I think it was along those lines where he's like, you don't have to hold on to these negative things, and you can embrace these things, and you just surround yourself with, love and light and try not to do any harm in the world is really his message. Yeah.
You can, as I said, you can tell he has such a big heart, and you can tell that he was burdened, as you are, my darling, burdened to help humanity. And I think that we were talking before we really started about this idea of interconnectedness. And so one of the questions that for you, what has knowing Ingo done for your life? How is your life today a manifestation of knowing Ingo?
Oh gosh. Well, I like to think that he spent his time downloading everything into me. Except for I didn't know that he was downloading everything into me, right? That he was just trying to show me, the fun side. You say he was like so fun of like full of laughter and humor and he liked to serve a lot of wine because he liked to get gossip, and he knew the best way to do that was to get everybody drunk. And so he
get the loose lips going. Yeah. Oh my gosh, how wonderful.
So, I can watch him do all that and watch him navigate these people and all these extraordinary people that would come to visit him and talk to him. And then, and it would be really funny because he'd say like, he'd have them all, oh, the great Ingo Swann. And then we'd go eat at some greasy diner, and they've come all dressed up and everything. And, you don't really want to, I mean, You've lived in New York, right? Some of those like alleyway diner. That's where we would go. Yeah. Like with these, just to put people into a situation to see how they would handle them. Right.
To kind of like subvert their expectations.
Yeah. So so I think also he was very kind to everyone. Now, understandably, when he was working at SRI, he was very demanding, and he was very stubborn, and, he wanted his way, and for his reasons. But when I was with him, he was just so congenial and full of life and accommodating. So he could stop and talk to a homeless person on the street just as much as a very close friendship with the Princess Shirazi from Iran. So he could talk to royalty, or he could talk to somebody who was down and out. And in the way he treated them was exactly the same. Right? He didn't accord higher, he didn't raise himself up or lower himself down. He treated everybody the same. And when you look at his archives and people writing to him, he's very kind in writing back in answering them. And so for me, what I learned is this kind of kindness to people. Like, I may not agree with you, but I will listen to you, and I will try to understand what you are saying to me and be kind in my response to you. Instead of all these people who are so hostile at each other on social media, I just follow anybody who follows me, as long as they're not a porn site. And because I don't really need to see that. But But you could be on the left, it could be on the right. What is important is Ingo said, like, however so men approach me, that's very, from the Hindu script, that however so I do accept you, right? However so you come to me. So I will listen to that. So that's what he's sort of embodied in me, is this, like, we're all human. And we were all this kind of connectedness. And so as everybody sort of jockeys around to, like, contact or selling this one or behind this payroll or whatever it is, or my way of teaching or whatever it is, my message just keeps being the same. We are extraordinary. You can be extraordinary. You just have to know that you are extraordinary. And I keep just trying to say that message because that's ultimately the message he was trying to say, and to share that, because I think that's what he was trying to do until he finally was like, what the world does with anything is up to the world. By the end, he gets like very frustrated with where things are, because it is very hard to overcome this power structure. Like, you've talked about those secrets of power. Like, it is really hard to come against that. And for me, I just recognize, okay, it's there, but it doesn't, like I said, have to stop me from doing what I want to do. Yeah.
I think it's like the veil, darling. Once, like, the book was so helpful, right? Because once you see it, and you don't succumb to it. And I think that the message that you are bringing, that Ingo brought, is really the most beautiful thing in the whole world. And so I feel so blessed to have found Ingo and to now know you. And I just want to thank you so much, darling. Thank you so much for your time. And I could talk to you literally for hours. And I would love to make a time, first of all, to read your book properly, and then to talk to you about that in depth if you would be willing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you'll need to tell me where I can send it to you so you can get it.
Because I'm in Thailand, I'm going to get the Kindle because,
okay.
Yeah, it's very far away, but I will do that. And I just want to thank you for your time, darling. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. I hope that I answered most of your questions, or at least started to.
I could talk to you for just hours. And honestly, I had a whole list, but the topics that we covered were beyond my expectations. So I'm so grateful, Elly. And look, I want to come. You're in New York, right?
I'm actually in Tennessee.
Oh, in Tennessee. Oh, even better. I don't want to go to New York. So I'm going to come and we're going to crack some wine and we're going to just have more Ingo stories.
Okay. Well, I'll just do what Ingo does. I'll just make sure you have lots of wine so you can tell me all of your stories.
That's so funny. Oh, my darling. So do you drink wine at all or not?
No, I don't. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You learned. You saw.
What did Ingo teach you? Don't drink the wine.
That is so good. Oh, Elly, thank you so much, darling. This has just been an absolute delight. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you.
When we deal with the ancient mysteries, it's not a problem that can be solved with one particular approach.
A myriad of diverse approaches are required.
The Egyptian temple can be regarded as an exhaustive, encyclopedic summary of information. It contains effectively all that can be known about the principle to which it is consecrated.
They're using key symbols that they wouldn't be using if they didn't know this stuff.
Experts in a broad spectrum of disciplines.
Art is the bridge between science and spirituality. It has no allegiance to either camp.
If you look at ancient Egypt through the eyes of an artist, you see a very different place. As soon as we started reading the message, we began to understand why there's so much gatekeeping and trolling surrounding these subjects. The ancient message is in many ways the very definition of taboo.
The ancient Egyptians understood the brain and how to achieve altered states of consciousness.
The hypnagogic state, or third force, is the way into the unconscious.
I was interested in seeing if I could determine a biological basis of mystical states.
Our brains have been designed to allow in other realms and other realities that have been there all the time, surrounding us in every way, in all directions.
This intelligence of the heart, or this kind of consciousness up here of the two, it generates this kind of more living, dynamic perception of the world. So, and isn't that like the Uraeus crown and his Kundalini and the third eye?
Fueling astonishing revelations.
These were people who actually practiced Tantra, were initiated into Tantra. And that Tantra still exists today.
The sexual energy climbs the spine to the brain, and that the result is an awakening, artistic expression, realization, enlightenment.
We see this all the time in Egypt. The pharaoh wears a diadem with the cobra head jutting forth from it.
Revelations from even the most occulted sources.
Egyptology is this curious sort of weaving together of some inaccurate esoterics woven in with some definitely inaccurate truth claims about the material nature of reality. So the upshot of that is to have the most materialist cosmology humans have ever come up with, attempting to describe almost the least materialist human cosmology we've ever come up with.
They realized that you could actually hack the operating system of the universe.
I read every single Greco-Egyptian papyri on magic that's ever been found. And it's amazing, magic could be looked at as a technology. Something you do and you get a certain result.
Egypt itself, if you think about it, the egregore of ancient Egyptian magic is quite potent, and it has survived to this day and enthralls us to this day.
Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will.
The one topic that unites all Egyptian religious, spiritual, and magical practice is the concept of Heka.
So what it says to me when I see a gathering like this, which is truly eclectic and has brought together people from many different fields, I think that's it's a very good sign. It's a sign that the world is moving into a new area of inquiry.
Like Isis resurrecting Osiris to birth Horus, restoring order to the world, we resurrect ancient Egypt in our hour of need. Come explore the other Egypt. The resurrected Egypt. Magical Egypt.